Alright everybody, welcome back. So we continue talking about graphic design. Last video we talked about the images in graphic design, and today we're going to talk about the other part that makes up graphic design, and that's the letters, the font, the text, alright? So here's our introduction to typography, and we're going to talk about the anatomy of a letter. So typography is the study of like letters and type, and there's some interesting things in there that'll help us out. So the first thing we should take note of is that there are two kinds of letters out there. There's serif font, or letters with serifs, okay, and there's sans serif letters. That means without serifs. And serifs are these little things. Serifs are little decorative endings on the end of a letter. So serifs are kind of reminiscent and come from, think about chiseling letters into stone. And you have to make these cuts and make these little slices in the stone to end the cutting and the chiseling. And that's kind of what serifs look like and where they came from. And it definitely has a different feel than sans serif letters, which is a lot cleaner, a lot more modern looking. So the first thing to take note of is the cap height, okay? The cap height is the height of a capital letter. That's all it is. Now, sometimes we've got things like ascenders, like that H that go above it. That doesn't mean it's the end of all the letters, but it's where the capital letters are oriented to on the top. The baseline is what we write on when we have notebook paper. Baselines are what the letters are oriented to, whether they're there or not. So if you have a notebook, obviously you can see the baseline, but even like when something's printed or typed, like a book, or if you type something up and print it out, there's still a baseline there, even though you can't see it. Rounded letters sit a little bit lower than letters that have a flat bottom, and it's called an overhang. The reason for this is so that it feels a little more like it's sitting on the baseline. If it was just touching the baseline, it's going to feel a bit like it's teetering, just visually. So in order to make it feel a bit more grounded, round letters are given an overhang. So we've got the cap height and we have the baseline. We also have the X height. So what the X height is the height of a lowercase x. And that is not the height of all lowercase letters, but it's definitely a line that they're kind of oriented to as well. You can see the H here goes above it, but it's still oriented to the X height. So this is an ascender. An ascender is a part of a lowercase letter that goes above the X height, like here on this H. You've also got letters like T or F and L. Those all go above the X height. That's an ascender. So if we got ascenders, we've also got descenders. So that's a part of a lowercase letter that goes below the baseline. So next we have bowls. So this is a round letter that has an enclosed space. So the actual round part is called the bowl of the letter. And the inside is called something different. That's called a counter. So a lot of letters have stems. And this is a straight part of a letter that kind of is where the letter branches off from. Not all letters, like this O here, but a lot of letters have stems. Now there's only one letter that has a spine, and that's an S, capital and lowercase. And you can see how the shape kind of resembles a spine. So some letters have crossbars, and that's a horizontal line that's somewhere kind of in the middle of the letter. So we can see the A and the H, but if you also think of something like a lowercase t or an F, they've also got crossbars. So let's take a look at the way these letters are sitting here. You've got the cap height where the B is, but if you look, the K and the D go above the cap height, and that happens a lot with lowercase ascenders. And take note of the overhang on the O, that's going a little bit below the baseline, and the descender height there with the Y. Some descenders descend at different lengths. So notice a difference here in the way these letters look. They're all the same point size, but that can really come across different visually when you do things like making the X height higher or lower, or changing the width of the letters. They can feel a lot bigger. Like if you see Interstate Regular looks much larger than Mrs. Eaves. And they all have their uses. Like Interstate Regular is used on signs on the freeway, and you want to be able to see it very clearly. Mrs. Eaves is kind of hard to read. Maybe it would only be used for something kind of like special and small and maybe not a whole lot of text. Here's a comparison with Mrs. Eaves and Helvetica. They're both the same point size, but they have a very different feel. Helvetica fills out the space a lot more, much bigger, easier to read. Mrs. Eaves, harder to read, smaller, looks a little more delicate. Both very different, even though the same size. Okay, so let's talk about fonts and typefaces. So a font is a specific group of letters within a typeface or font family. So the Roman font is the main version or the core of this typeface where all the other versions are kind of based off of. You've got italicized versions of fonts, and that's the version that's kind of based a little more on cursive, has a little more of an organic feel. So small caps is a font version that is made to have a height that's similar to the X height. So you're getting capital letters, but at the size of the X height of the Roman version. And the reason for that would be to make the width of the letters match the size of the Roman version of the font at the same point size. If you can imagine, if you just shrunk the capital letters down, you're going to get skinnier letters, and they won't look as good when they're next to the regular version of the font. Bold would obviously be a bold version. It's a typeface that has more emphasis, right? It's thicker, a little easier to see. And you also can have things like bold that's italicized as well, and many others. So here's a comparison with caps and small caps. So pseudo small caps, they're just shrunken versions of the actual full-size cap version. And true small caps is somebody designed the font to be that size. So you can see how it kind of matches the size of the lowercase letters on the bottom. In the top, you can see those first words look a little skinnier and looks a little bit out of place. So a thing to be aware of, now that we've seen that there's lots of different versions of a typeface out there, is that it's a crime to distort the letter yourself. If you want a skinny version of a font, look for one that's skinny or that has a skinny version already made. When we artificially stretch or squash things, it looks distorted and it doesn't quite look right. The width of the letters will be off in comparison to each other, and there's so much care and design taken into making these letters and making different versions of them. When we do it artificially, it just ends up looking amateur, ugly, and just plain old bad. So please don't ever distort your letters unless in a special occasion there's maybe a logo or something special where you're very aware of what you're doing and it's part of the design. But 99% of the time, it's a mistake. All right, guys, that'll do it for our lesson on typography, and I hope you guys learned something about letters. See you next time in the next video.